Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have viewers from around the world, and we're honored and pleased to have you with us for this very important presentation. We're very pleased to have Scott Zucker with us. He's a leading lawyer in Atlanta, but one of the great passions in his life is spreading the word about ethical wills, legacy letters, the idea that we ought to, and we're very much in favor of this, which is why we've invited him to be on. We ought to be bequeathing not just the material wealth that we've accumulated, which seems to be quite well catered for by the legal profession with estate planning in the traditional sense. But Scott's focus is the intangibles, not just what you own, but who you are and how you transmit your core values, the values by which you lived your life, to the next generation and beyond. Each of you should have gotten a worksheet so that at the end of this, you may be inspired to develop your own legacy letter, as formal or as informal, as short or as long as you like. Some people even do it in a video, recorded audio or video, very flexible, but it's the concept is to make sure that you bequeath the values that you cherish and that you really want to pass on to those who follow you. Of course, doing presentations of this nature is part of how RVW views our role, because we don't think of ourselves as just wealth managers. Our goal is to be a focal point in the GPS system, your financial and material GPS system, and the context for all of that is the values that drive you, and we try to mirror those, by the way, in everything we do for each of our clients. We don't run a one-size-fits-all operation. We are very tailored, bespoke, and customized, and all of the things that are important to each one of you is by definition important to us. It is worth remembering in the context of this that there was a very famous book written by Steve Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of his habits that he advocates for powerful, meaningful living is the habit of starting with the end in mind. And perhaps for each of us, the end for each of us is our own passing, our own demise. And he suggests that we write our own epitaph, our own eulogy, and then work backwards to where we are now so that we now have a spiritual GPS so that at the end of our life, the eulogy which we've crafted for ourselves will be an inevitable outcome of the way we've lived our lives. So, Scott, with that introduction, I'm honored on behalf of RVW, first of all, to thank you. Scott, we're deeply grateful for the fact that you donate your time. You don't charge for this. You do this as an act of loving, goodwill, kindness, and giving out to the broader community to do these presentations to strangers, to people you don't know. At least we were strangers until a few weeks ago, and now we kind of more or less know each other. But to strangers, this is an act of tremendous giving, of goodwill, of caring for your fellow human being. We're deeply grateful for you, and we appreciate the time you've taken out of your very busy schedule. You are a leading lawyer and community activist in Atlanta. We're deeply honored and grateful for the time you've taken out. We will always treasure this presentation as something quite special. And with that, I introduce you to the viewers, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Selwyn. That was a beautiful introduction. I very much appreciate it. I'm honored to be with you and your group today. It's a meaningful topic to me. I am an advocate for what we'll talk about with regard to ethical wills. I think your introduction was beautiful about the importance of understanding the emotional and spiritual aspect of what ethical wills could be. It's important for me to clarify, I am a lawyer, but I'm not a trust and estates lawyer. So this comes to me, as we'll learn this morning as I'm talking to you, about what brought me to this issue and maybe what brings a lot of us to these topics, these hard topics regarding death and dying, and what we leave for our legacy for our families and friends and those in future generations. So I kind of will start out with the recognition, and I think we all sort of agree on this sort of tough topic, that some of the greatest fears in life is not really death and dying, but the concept of potentially being forgotten. So I really want that to sink in as a starting point about how we have all lived wonderful, interesting, fulfilling lives, meaningful lives with our friends and our families, and the fear of being forgotten. We want to be remembered for who we were, who we loved, how we loved, what we fought for, what we were passionate about, what we believed in. We want to make sure that our stories continue in future generations about things we've experienced, things our parents experienced, things our grandparents experienced that we know about that would be lost in future generations if we didn't share them. So there's a whole body of energy about the concept of having these stories and lessons and experiences that you want to share with those that you leave behind, that need to be captured some way. And as I talk about my story today, maybe we can all sort of benefit and think about the concept of creating what we'll learn to be something called an ethical will. So let me start out a little bit of background on me, and I love this picture. This picture of me and my brothers. I was born in 1962. I'm the baby in that picture. I'm the youngest of the four boys. There were many years between me and my next oldest brothers. I was sort of the last chance for my parents to have a girl that didn't work out. But so when I was born, my parents were much older. And as a result, they passed when I was in my 20s. And now I'm 63. It's been a long time since I've lost my parents. But what happened at that juncture of a family transition, of being without my parents, was the reality that there were still things that I wanted to learn from them, lessons that they had experienced, stories that I wanted them to share that I never heard, never learned from them because I lost them too early. And then I had my own family, and this is a picture. My boys are now 32 and 28, but I love this picture. But when I had my own children and I started worrying about the concept of what happens if something happens to me similar to losing my parents at a young age, would there be stories that they didn't know, lessons that I hadn't taught them, questions they would ask that I wouldn't be around to answer? So I really started looking into what the solution to that gap would be. If they had questions that I hadn't answered, how would they know how I felt about certain things? So I started learning about the concept of an ethical will. Now you hear, and Selvin even mentioned that you hear these terms legacy letters or ethical wills, or any sort of writing or video or demonstration of sharing these stories, these lessons, these experiences to pass along to your families. They all fall into this world of creating something considered to be an ethical will. It is not a legal document, but it can be a companion to a legal document. So again, I'm not a trust in the estates lawyer, and I don't even dare to be considered to be knowledgeable about the world of trust and estates. But an ethical will that you would write as a companion to your legal will, where you're giving away your material wealth, would be the perfect opportunity to create the companion to that preparation. So many of you are working with Selvin and working with trust and estates lawyers with regard to the issue of material wealth. Please add this to, as again, a reference to what Selvin said, your GPS of what you may want to create as a goal as you work towards preparing these documents. And the ethical will is the passage of this spiritual wealth, the lessons learned, the experiences. It's a very personal message that can be done many different ways. Again, video or writing or other expressions of love. I found some references over the years to people of importance that have written about this issue. One of them was a famous author, Rabbi Harold S. Kushner. He wrote the book When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Many of you have read or heard about. And also with regard to the concept of legacy writing. And he wrote that an ethical will can be seen as a gift of love, a way of saying, this is what I found gave me satisfaction and gave my life meaning. So again, I just sort of want to take a minute and think about that. The opportunity for you to create something that shares that message to your children And I truly believe not even your children as much because they've had the pleasure of knowing you and maybe hearing these stories, but your grandchildren. And let me tell you, the concept of creating something tangible that your great grandchildren may be able to read about you and learn about you. What a treasure that would be. I think many of you probably share this feeling with me that I do not really know the story of somewhat of my grandparents, certainly not my great grandparents as they emigrated to the United States and built a life here. I did not know their struggles and their stories, and I would have loved to have learned more about it. Many of us spend time on ancestry programs to learn about this, but can you imagine finding something as a writing from your great grandparents about their experiences, how meaningful that would be? So these ethical wills are the opportunity to tangibly create that legacy message to share for future generations, so you will not be forgotten and the importance of your life will continue to future generations, which look, we all deserve. We've all lived meaningful lives, and our the gift of this information to future generations is truly that, is a gift. And I think that we ought to think about it that way. It's not selfish. I think it really has transferable meaning and importance for many of us who think about this in terms of the goal of sharing this information with our families. Another writer that I've come across talks about the creation of ethical wills, Jack Reimer. You do not have to be a professional writer in order to prepare an ethical will. I love this. Words that come from the heart enter the heart. It's just a beautiful sentiment that you sit down and you start creating this messaging to your family that comes from a natural and true place of what you're sharing. These experiences, these lessons can be extremely meaningful and very impactful. I will share a story that was in the press in the Atlanta News not too long ago about a fire at a home, and there had been a letter written from a father to his son near his passing, and it was in a box in a closet. And the son, whose house was on fire, fought to get that box with that letter because that was the most important thing for him to retrieve from his house. And he talked about the fact that the first thing he thought about in terms of recovering something from the house before the fire engulfed it was this box with this letter from his father. That has to speak volumes to us about the importance of these documents and what it means to us. So something to think about, and that article was really telling and impactful for me. So look, an ethical will, as you think about preparing it in the context, there's lots of guides for this. I know Selvin's giving you some materials to create your own program and outline for answering this. But I want to walk through some themes with you, and then I'll additionally we'll walk through some prompts with you that might help you with this. But generally, the goal of an ethical will is to address these areas for you to think about as you start outlining what you might want to talk about, what your values and beliefs may be. So let's stop there for a minute. How incredible it would be to understand what drives you and what you believe in and what you are passionate about and what moves your support for integrity and courage and dignity in the concept of values and beliefs. If you were to share that to others so they know who you are and they could retrieve that for future generations, how meaningful would that be? Now, it's not easy for us to talk about some of these things, but it's important that if you're going to prepare an ethical will, that you share these opportunities to talk about who you are and what you believe and what your values are, because that's really what people would be looking for when the time comes when they read that story to learn more about you. All right, lessons learned. Many of us who joke about the fact that we have lived our lives and learned a lot. What a waste it would be to not share some of those lessons, some of those mistakes, to future generations so they can avoid the risk of their own mistakes down the road. Sometimes we want that skin knee for our children and grandchildren themselves, but there are important lessons that we have learned that we want to share to avoid some of those mistakes down the road for future generations. So maybe this is an opportunity to do it. The joys of life would be expressed, stories and events, hopes and dreams for the future. What a beautiful message that would be. Regrets and forgiveness relative to certain issues that we may have made certain mistakes. This would be the time to do it. And certainly messages of love and gratitude. How impactful that would be to address these issues in a document for future generations. That would conceptually be the themes of an ethical will. There's no rules to ethical wills. I want to emphasize the fact that these are just guidelines of things to inspire you to talk about certain areas. But there is no particular rule with regard to ethical wills. No statutory structure as there would be to wills relating to material wealth. Ethical wills can be short, can be long, can be written, can be videoed. Again, there's no guidelines. What we're talking about today are just supportive themes for you to think about if you were to sit down and start working on a document like that. And we'll talk a little bit about what I've done, and maybe we'll inspire you as well. But this is the concept of ethical wills. So I know I don't have you personally to do this with, but I wanted to play a little bit with some exercises for you to just sit back and think about for a minute to, again, spark your excitement and consideration of an ethical will. So based on your life experiences, what you know now, what piece of advice would you give yourself if you were 20 years old again? Now, if I know many of you are starting to think like, I should have invested in Google or Amazon. Okay, we're not talking about material wealth here. We're talking about how you would approach life differently, your themes of guidance for the next generation when they're in their 20s and they're thinking about building a life. What would you tell them? What would you give yourself as advice if you had the chance to do it over again? Maybe nothing would be different. Maybe you'd want the spark of uncertainty, but maybe there would be something you would talk about with regard to how you drove yourself to the success that you have, maybe things that you left behind, things that you should have paid more attention to, maybe, forks in the road that you should have taken. This would be an interesting question for you to consider and think about with regard to having the opportunity to do it all again. And that's what this exercise is about. So this may be something that sparks interest in you and want to talk about relative to this sort of exercise. I'll give you another one. And I will tell you that when I go to synagogues and churches and speak to groups in live, you will hear some very interesting responses to these sort of exercises in a live audience. I have to tell you this one story. I was talking to a group and sitting in front of a couple who had been married for over 60 years. They got married in their 20s. The wife held up her hand. Everyone turned to the wife. What advice would you give yourself if you were 20 years old again? She turned. She goes, "Well, I wouldn't have married this guy." So anyway, I hope that was funny. But the reaction of the group was hysterical. Obviously, a little comic relief in the concept. She was kidding, of course, but anyway, it was kind of funny. All right, question number 2. What question do you wish you had asked your grandparents or parents before they passed? And this goes to really the essence of what sparked my energy about ethical wills. I had so many questions for my parents when I was newly married with my small children. It's hard to be a parent. It's a challenge to work through the issues of raising a family, financially supporting a family, challenges with regard to children maybe with special needs, or all the issues that I know many of you face all the time. And sometimes you don't have an answer or someone to guide you to the answer to that question. And many of us, have been lucky that they had parents. I have many friends that still have their parents and they have a resource to go to. Some of us do not. And there are many questions that I wish I had asked my grandparents and parents before they passed for guidance, but I didn't know at that time that I needed it. And this will lead you a little bit to where I'm going with what I've prepared for my kids. But you need to know those questions and maybe help answer those questions in the preparation of the ethical will documents that you may prepare. So again, another exercise for you to think about it. What question might you have asked your grandparents or parents before they passed? Maybe it was a story about how they came to the country and had their first jobs and how they survived challenges, illness, loss of spouses, loss of children. I mean, there's so much we all endure. Sometimes it's helpful to get the answers to those questions from those who have experienced it before us. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to share that information with those who may need it in the years to come. So again, I offer this as guidance to what you might work on preparing yourself as an ethical will. Again, I know Selvin has provided materials that has some of these prompts, but I just wanted to sort of outline for you some thoughts with regard to questions that may trigger some excitement for you with respect to answering some of these questions. What you're most grateful for, the piece of advice that you received, what made you happy, the biggest challenges, hopes and dreams, again, are a redundant theme in the concept of ethical wills, strongest advice. And then this last one, I want you to remember one thing about me. That's a big prompt. That's a hard question. But going back to the first thing I said, is one of the greatest fears in life is to be forgotten, is the opportunity to identify the most important thing you want to be remembered for. Maybe it's for your role in your family. Maybe it's for your involvement in your community. Maybe it's for a professional achievement. It doesn't matter, because it identifies who we are and what we lived for and what we achieved or didn't achieve. Maybe the thing you want to be remembered for is the mistake that you wish you hadn't made. I mean, this is an opportunity for you to share your reality and have people know you that otherwise would not get the chance to know you in future generations. So again, these are just prompts for you to think about. Again, the materials I know Selvin's going to provide to you is helpful as well. It is not easy to start. Many of us have that frozen nature of looking at the blank page when we're going to try to fill it out. But I want this to be an inspiration for you to think about the joy of filling in these questions. Again, it is not a selfish act to answer these questions about you, because I can guarantee you that the information you provide will ultimately be a gift to those who to later receive it. It is truly, going back to the man looking for the letter from his father, this sharing of honesty and emotion and love is something that is irreplaceable and is a gift to those who receive it. So I hope these prompts will help you. Again, and as I said before, the ultimate creation of an ethical will has no rules. It can't be too short or too long. We want you to be true to yourself, authentic. You don't have to create things to make your life more interesting one way or the other. You are who you are. You've achieved what you've achieved. You've experienced what you have. Your lessons are your lessons. Everyone has their own path and stories. That's what makes us unique and special, and what makes us that much more important for us to share. So this is the opportunity for you to be honest and authentic. I also add to be positive. This is not a time to be negative or critical. I think one of the rules of ethical wills for me is not an opportunity to explain why you didn't like somebody, or leave a message behind that may be negative about your loved ones or others. It's a time to be positive. No one wants to get a message after the fact of negativity. So keep the spirit of the positive goal of an ethical will in terms of sharing the experiences, the life lessons, the hopes and dreams, the love, the joys, the shared information about who you are and what you lived is really important to stay positive. So as we dig further into this, I want to share a little bit about my journey because I think it may help, and I'm sort of proud of it. Again, I had my family in my late 20s, early 30s, and I started grappling with these questions and started learning about ethical wills. I started the title of my quote ethical will was initially 40 things about turning 40. And I wrote now that I've turned over 60, I've added 20 more since in the last 20 years, and I continue to write them. I have 63 things about turning 63 now in my ethical will, and I continue to add. So what do I write about? Topics. I've created 63 topics, and this is my way of sharing my ethical will to my children, now grandchildren, and future generations. I have picked, in each year I add another topic. I will tell you that in this last year, where my grandchild is now a little over a year old, I've added a topic on having grandchildren. But my topics were an opportunity for me, and please feel free to use any of this yourself, that I felt like I could write about, and as compared to answering questions. So my ethical will was created with the concept of thinking about topics and then writing about those topics: honesty, happiness, music, goals, stress, children, risk, jealousy, sports, prayer, love, baseball. I'm from Massachusetts. I have a longtime Boston Red Sox fan. So I have to tell you that I wrote my first chapters on the disappointment of the Red Sox for 90 years. After they won their first World Series, I was able to write an addendum to my baseball paragraph. So I thought that was sort of funny, that we can always continue to add and increase as the years go on to our stories. Friends, marriage. I've been married 36 wonderful years, and each year is an opportunity to talk about the value of marriage, fear, and death. And I finish with death because I think, in the general sense of an ethical will, it is also an opportunity for you, and sort of, again, take a moment when you think about this, to write about how you may want your funeral to be managed, what may be important to you in terms of music or writing. In certain faiths, there's not much deviation from what needs to be done in terms of a funeral event, but there may be opportunities for shivas or wakes where other things could be added based upon your wishes. And nobody would know unless you were willing to talk about the things that are important to you that may want to be shared as part of your death. And that's okay. And it's something that's going to happen to all of us. And maybe that's just not something we want to realize and talk about at this point. I hope I have many, many years in front of me, but I'm honest to the fact, because I've experienced it with my parents, that it is an inevitable reality of our lives that we will pass. And when that time happens, I don't want my children to be questioning what I may have wanted or not wanted or thought about with regard to that celebration of life, whatever it may be. So that is in that paragraph for me. And I have, again, over the years, edited and updated that. This need not be a static document. I mean, certainly if you wait until the last days of your lives to do this, it will be. But as you may write about things, as you grow and learn, you may write and amend and change. I will tell you that my ethical will is not one that I plan on sharing with my family until I'm gone, but many times people will share their ethical wills as they write it and share it with their family. That is absolutely an opportunity for you as well. So I appreciate you listening to my story with regard to the creation of the ethical will. I want to finish with one other piece of this, and this is not an advertisement for what I've written, but I want to share why I wrote it. Lawyers like to write, and I am a novelist as a hobby. So I wrote a novel called Battle for Life. And the story of Battle for Life is my dad's story. It's a fictional novel, but it's based upon my dad's experience in World War II that I really only learned after he was gone. And I know that may sound very strange, but many of you who have parents from the World War II generation, they didn't really talk about their experiences in the war. My father was very quiet about his experiences in the war. And I found a lot of materials about his wartime service after he was gone. And it struck me that it was a story that I could not let die with me, that I wanted to make sure my future generations knew the story about my father and his service in World War II. So here's a picture of my dad. He started out in the Merchant Marines and then went to the U.S. Navy. He was stationed ultimately on an aircraft carrier called the Bunker Hill in the Pacific towards the end of World War II in 1943, 1944 and 1945. It's a really, and many of you have these stories from your parents as well of their wartime experiences, but the particular story relating to the Bunker Hill, of which I built this fictional narrative about a father and son story, but based upon my father's experience, was the opportunity to make sure this story continued on. So the story about the Bunker Hill was that in the late stages of the war, in May of 1945, the aircraft carrier was off of the islands of Iwo Jima and ultimately of Okinawa, the last battles of the Pacific in World War II. I'm not a World War II history buff, but I learned a lot about these battles in the Pacific as I learned more and more and studied about my father's story. But he was on the ship in May of 1945 after completing their mission in Iwo Jima and capturing Iwo Jima. They moved to Okinawa, which was the last battle of the Pacific in May of 1945, ultimately before the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end the war. On May 11th, 1945, the Bunker Hill was stationed off the island of Okinawa. And if you remember hearing about the issues of kamikaze planes as a last desperate act of the Japanese in the end of World War II, there were two kamikaze planes that famously hit his ship, the Bunker Hill. And in a matter of a few moments, 393 men were immediately killed and another 264 men were wounded. But the ship did not sink. And it is regarded in the war in the Pacific as one of the most significant events of the turning points towards the end of the war. It's recognized in the World War II Museum in New Orleans, which I did not know until I haphazardly went to New Orleans and saw this exhibit about my father's ship. So again, this is stuff that was amazing to me. And the next day at sea, it was the longest burial at sea in the history of the U.S. Navy. And my father was on the ship. He was injured in the ship. And after he passed, I found his medals in a desk drawer that he had never shared with us. And one of them was a Purple Heart for the injuries that he suffered in World War II. Now, I wrote this story as an ethical will for my father because he never told the story, and I thought it was important to share. And maybe I've overdone it. Maybe I've told his story. I've told my story in the ethical will in the now the 60 topics for 60 years. But I have done that and shared that writing as, again, an example for you in the audience to hopefully maybe be motivated about the importance of these stories and life lessons being lost if not shared, and the duty and honor it is to share these stories, if not for ourselves, but for our family members who otherwise will not do this themselves, or now who have passed who haven't shared these stories. I think it's maybe even considered a responsibility or obligation with regard to some of these life stories to make sure that they're passed to future generations because of the impact that they had in our families. If nothing else, the theme, certainly with regard to my father, was themes of courage and heroism, honor, integrity, sacrifice. These are all things, obviously, that were part of that concept, that are messages of values that I wanted to share. And Selvin, perfect timing, because I was wrapping up. And anyway, that I hope has been a global sense of how to do an ethical will, the importance of ethical wills. And I'm always, the reason I gave my information is if any of you are intimidated by it and need a little push, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk to you anytime about sitting down and working on your own ethical will, or the sharing of stories from others. So Selvin, back to you. And I know we want to have a little bit of a dialogue.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott. First of all, thank you for that presentation. It was very personal, very meaningful, and I hope very motivational, so that people, who are watching, do that. A couple of points. First of all, thank you for paying tribute to me for all this material. I'm happy to tell you I'm supported by, encouraged by, assisted by a team of amazing people. I call it the jewelry collection of RVW. We have a collection of gems serving our clients, and they all had a big hand in putting together the preparation material that went out. So I'm honored to have my son Jonathan as my partner, and a group of just dedicated, amazing people who took this project as seriously as Jonathan and I did. I just happen to be the face for this particular presentation because I happen to be the oldest guy in the room, and I thought it may be appropriate for me to take the rowing oar at the firm. But this was a team-inspired effort, and the material that we sent out was team-inspired. We have a phenomenal team. Each one of them makes me proud every day of our attitude in all of these areas. And by the way, in my own legacy will, one of the things I'm most proud of, and my family knows and will know, is that I've surrounded myself with people who are better than I am. It's been my philosophy throughout my business life, and it's one of my things in my ethical will, is surround yourself with people who are better than you, who you can learn from. And there's some findings that you are actually the sum total of the 5 people you spend most time with. So I'm honored to be spending a lot of time with really high-grade people who care passionately about what we do for our clients. My own ethical will is interesting. When I turned 60, I wrote a series of points, pretty much mirroring yours. I didn't count them. I think there are probably about 40. It's 2 sides of a page. And I had them printed and handed out to my children at my 60th birthday. And I said to them, this is not necessarily what I've achieved, but it's my aspirational list of how I seek to live my life. And at some point in the future, you'll be able to see to what extent I was successful in living out these principles. And I still consider them to be a wonderful list of principles. I've taken also to telling my ethical will to my children and grandchildren. I've had kind of discussion sessions on things like the biggest mistakes I made and the lessons that I learned, which is the point of mistakes really, is, what are the mistakes you made and what have you learned from them, which is really critical. You get to a point in life where you actually treasure your mistakes. They become a critical pivoting point for who you became and what you learned and what you grew, how you grew out of them. So I think that's important. I've also had a couple of discussions with my grandchildren on some funny experiences, unique experiences. I was in the South African Army where I was drafted, and there's some very funny stories about how I got in, how I managed to get out, stuff that happened while I was there, and so on. And I've tried to color my life so that they understand much of it in person, and that'll, I presume, get passed down in its own way as well. So I think it's critical, though, to do an ethical will. I really do. And as I said, for me, it's been a combination of a written document and specific discussion sessions on things I wanted to pass on. But I hope that, for all of us, our life is a living ethical will. And I think the challenge is to live your ethical will. As I started off by saying, Steve Covey brilliantly put it, live your life backwards from the eulogy that you've written for yourself, and that becomes your goal, your GPS that guides you, and then to work forward so that the eulogy that you want read about you actually is an inevitable outcome of how you lived your life. So with that, I thank everybody for their time. You've got a wonderful set of material. You've got a workbook on developing your own ethical will, which is a terrific tool that will go well as an accompaniment to this narrative from Scott, which we appreciate so much. And you have a generic overall estate plan that deals with everything else. So between the two, you've got handouts from us that help you to handle the total transmission of everything you hold dear, both material and your values and priorities. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again soon with our next video educational tool on some other aspect of your life. Thanks, everybody, and be well and be blessed. Thank you.